So welcome to this presentation. It'll be on operational security by Club.A, an ethical hacking club out of Canada. Little disclaimer before we get into the topic here. It's been kind of brought to our attention that it's important for us to give a disclaimer for this stuff. Firstly, Club.A is an educational group. We do not do anything illegally. All information that we share is in the pursuit of cybersecurity knowledge. Our goal is to learn how to prevent computer crime, but we first need to understand it. We do not aim to arm the bad guys. We aim to help good guys protect themselves. And we want to emphasize that hacking any individual or organization without explicit written consent with a clearly defined scope and purpose is illegal. And we do not hold ourselves responsible for any actions you take with this knowledge. So just a little overview of what we're talking about today. We're going to answer the question of why should we talk about OPSEC. Then we're going to get into operational security, the definition. We're going to talk about operational security considerations. We're going to talk about digital forensics a little bit. We're going to talk about tracking, digital identities, basic OPSEC recommendations, and then that will be the conclusion of our presentation. So why OPSEC? I would argue that OPSEC is one of the core concepts that someone learning cybersecurity should start getting familiar with when they start getting into cybersecurity. It's important because if you don't go in with good operational security practices, then you're bound to slip up and make a big mistake. So it's good to learn make those mistakes early on and have good security practices when you start to hit the real and more intense situations later on in your career. If you're just a hobbyist, it's still great information to know. Even if you're just a civilian, that kind of thing, you're not like doing cybersecurity, you're not even in IT or software development, or even in a situation where you need like crazy OPSEC, it's still good to know just how to be safe online, how to operate effectively, and how to protect not only yourself, but your friends and family. So some situations that sloppy operational security can lead to is like your computer or your devices getting hijacked. Identity theft is probably the biggest risk to the average person. Getting your bank information stolen, getting your whatever country you live in, if it's Canada or the U.S., your social security number, or social insurance number getting stolen, which could lead to people taking out loans in your name, that kind of stuff. You could also potentially see family and friends getting hacked as well. You could get ransomwared. You could be framed for things. Just generally huge headaches that you do not want to deal with. And so that's why just implementing and applying basic OPSEC practices in your life could make a world of a difference. It could take you from being a low-hanging fruit to being harder, harder to get compromised. And that's a big deal. So what is OPSEC? It's in InfoSec, it's operational security, but in the military, I've heard it being, when I did my research, I've heard it being called operations security. And basically, it's a concept termed by or coined by the military to essentially lock down their military operations. So they have like a 5-step process here of it starts with identifying critical information within the operation. Then from there, they analyze threats. Then they analyze what vulnerabilities are present with that critical information and how a threat could basically get that information. And then they assess the risk, the overall risk and impact, and then they apply countermeasures that are appropriate to mitigate those risks and vulnerabilities. So that's the verbiage for today and the really general aspect of it. But when it comes to cybersecurity, it's not that much different. You apply the same steps, and in terms of military operations, there's a few case studies we can talk about. In World War II, there was a phrase that went around called loose lips may sink ships, I think is what it was. And it was basically just telling people like, don't talk about what you know or what your friends are telling you about like the different operations, what ships they're on, where the ships are, that kind of stuff, or where operations are happening, because then the enemy might find out, and then that could lead to more military deaths, etc., that kind of stuff. Um, Same thing, pretty similar thing was happening in the Ukraine, actually, in the most might still be happening with soldiers sharing Instagram posts on the front line and potentially revealing um, locations and operations and stuff like that. So those types of things are relevant to military, but we'll talk a lot more about how they're relevant to civilians and to just the average computer user like us. So one thing to consider with operational security is who's your adversary. So it's obviously very context specific. For us, just being students, enthusiasts, some of us are industry professionals. We work in cybersecurity. For each one of us, it might be a little different. For the average person, your adversary is just going to probably be like your average scammer, or someone that's just um, maybe not specifically targeted you, but you've fallen into one of their traps, that type of thing. For more complex situations, like a white hat, someone working as a penetration tester or a red teamer or a blue teamer, that kind of thing, um, they may encounter a little bit more of a targeted attack from adversarial groups like ransomware groups and that type of stuff. But if you work for the government or for the military, that kind of thing, you're going to be experiencing a much crazier type of adversary that we call advanced persistent threats. And those guys are opposing military groups usually, or cybersecurity groups usually. Like there's all kinds of names for them, like APT40, like that kind of stuff, or like Fancy Bear. I think that's the CrowdStrike term for who is it? It might have been FireEye. Either way, it's one of the terms for one of the Russian advanced persistent groups. And so, depending on who your adversary is, you might need to ramp up or not worry too much about what your operational security needs are. And so that's the first thing really you need to consider in OPSEC. The next thing would be your operational requirements. So you have to take a look at like what services you're running and what kind of programs you use and what kind of devices you use, what kind of operating systems you have. You have to look at what you can't operate without and what you have to operate with, and that kind of thing. For us, just average people, I mean, there's really no harm in having social media. We can't really live without using the internet. Most, like, even if you go to school, you kind of have to use the internet for school, that kind of stuff. So there's things that you can't live without and things that you probably can, like social media. Let's say you don't want people to be able to profile your life, so you don't really want to have a social media presence. You can totally live fine with that, but you can't really live without using the internet. So then the idea is you have to identify those things you have to live with, and you need to design now a plan for how to use those things in a secure way. So this might feel like it's kind of jumping topics here, but it is related because operational security and digital forensics kind of go hand in hand. Because when you study digital forensics, you start to learn how people can identify you, and specifically you, because in like you know digital forensics in the court of law and that type of stuff, they need to be able to prove that it was you using that device or you using that computer behind that keyboard, right? So they need to prove that, firstly, it belonged to you. Firstly, that it was you using it at those times. It was you, that user that you use on that computer, opening those files. That was, using the web browser at that time, that type of thing. So digital forensics can look at that type of stuff. It's the science of taking a computer and analyzing all of the browser history, email history, all the artifacts that are within that computer, including files, images, movies, documents, registry keys if it's Windows, hidden directories, that type of stuff, and even deleted files, which aren't really on, well, at least when it comes to Windows, they're not really deleted. In other operating systems, it's a different story. You'll have to look at those more specifically, but a lot of these digital forensics tools can actually uncover those deleted files and the deleted files that have been partially corrupted and that type of stuff. So those types of things can be used to identify the user of the computer. Another thing to think about when it comes to that, it's related to it, is digital tracking. So when you're using, let's be honest, it's pretty much everything is tracking you at this point. When you browse a website, it's using cookies and that type of stuff to track your session. It's getting a little bit better with how invasive they are. Every website now has that like opt-in cookie policy and that kind of stuff, and they make it really annoying so that you just accept all of the cookies and that type of stuff. But we'll talk a little bit about what kinds of data they do collect on you and what types of things they use to identify you when you go from one website to another. A lot of these web trackers can actually check your browser history and can see the other websites you viewed and you visited, and maybe even what products you visited on those, and then can build kind of a profile on you. And that's how a lot of these social networks actually work. They'll build entire profiles on you, and they'll find out what you like, what you don't like. Like, you can check out your Google Analytics for this to see like what it knows about you and what it's like, the profile it's built on you based on all of its the tracker data that it's collected on you. And it's astoundingly accurate as to what your interests are, what the things you don't like are, that kind of stuff. I can't remember what the link is, but one of the guys from the club can probably drop it in the chat at some point. Another, apps on your mobile devices, those are notoriously invasive with what they track and what they can actually pull from your phone about you. Like, they check your emails, they check your messages. A lot of these places will say that they don't, but they do. In the background, they do. And apps are, mobile is a lot harder. Computers, you're usually a little more in control of what you can do. But even then, if you're using Chrome, I know for sure Chrome's a culprit in this, but I also said potentially Safari and Edge. I think Microsoft collects a lot of data on you too. But if you're using Chrome, all your data is being collected by them no matter what you say. And Firefox is a little better about it. But then there's other browsers out there that are designed for anonymity, like Brave. You can opt in, and then I don't know, I can't remember, but in the past you were able to make some money from sharing your data. And then obviously Tor is probably one of the best anonymity browsers that's out there if used correctly. And one thing I wanted to talk about too is operating systems, because depending on what operating system you use, you can't really opt out of it collecting data about your usage on that device. So Windows, you can download it on your computer for free. It'll say, activate Windows in the corner and stuff, but there's a reason why they want everyone to use Windows. And it's because, they're collecting information on you. You'll see it, like, I actually just wrote up a little program to demonstrate this. And I'll pull it up right now. So just this little, Python tkinter type map thing. And I ran a netstat in, behind it, and pumped that data into this and just mapped out the current active outbound connections to that my computer is making. And then I plotted them on this map to show where. And I don't really have a ton open on my computer right now. I just have the Google Slides and Discord, and that's it. And these are all the connections that my computer is making. And so you can see, like, there's a lot of Google, Seattle, Washington. There's Ashburn, Virginia. So it looks like there's some Amazon stuff, some Amazon connections there. I'm connected to the University of Oregon and Cloudflare, Microsoft. So that was obvious because Microsoft's always going to be communicating with its servers on your behalf. And a few other things here. So it's just a list of all the connections. You can see there's a lot more in this list than there is actual plots, because most of these are overlapping with each other. But, I'd be interested to know, like, if I had more things open, what kind of connections they'd make. Obviously, if you go to a website, it's going to pop up on the plot, right? But so anyways, I just thought that was an interesting kind of example. Because I think, I kind of listed this in like Windows, Mac OS X, and Linux because I don't know about Mac. I haven't really looked into that quite as much, but Linux, for sure, you have a lot more control over because it's an open source distribution, operating system distribution. So you're a lot more in control of what kind of connections your computer is making. So your digital identity, when they're collecting the data on you, what are they using to build that profile of you, right? Like how are they figuring out who you are? Well, one of the first things is your IP address, right? Because that reveals you're pretty close to your real world location. Usually it's just within a few blocks of where you actually are, depending on how your ISP is distributing your IP address and that kind of thing. Your browser identity. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but when you use a browser and you visit a web page, the server for that web page requests your browser fingerprint, and that's usually just a string that identifies the browser name, the browser version, and it can also grab some hardware identifiers depending on if it's like what the web application is, or if you're using, let's say a video game, you're playing a game and it's got anti-cheat enabled. Well, it's going to grab like all your hardware identifiers. A lot of anti-cheat is notorious for being like borderline spyware because it's grabbing not only your IP address and that kind of stuff, but it's grabbing like like the unique serial numbers off of like every hardware component you have connected to your motherboard and all that kind of stuff. Usernames, right? Email addresses, cookies. All of these are your basic like technological fingerprints that it can pull. And alone, like, I don't know, a lot of people have a GTX graphics card. Like, let's say there's 15,000 people out there that have like RTX 3090. I'll say that one because it's a little harder to get your hands on. But so how can I prove that this person with this graphics card is the person I'm looking at? Well, you can't do that with just one device, right? That's why they collect so much information, is so that they can use the combination of all those devices to narrow down precisely who you are. And then more advanced tracking like social media apps will use AI and that kind of thing to track behavior statistics on the web page. And they can actually profile you to like an alarmingly specific degree and accurate as to who you are, and to the point where they can identify you across like multiple social media platforms and multiple devices. Apparently, I would say check the facts on that one. I got that from, I think it's called The Social Dilemma on Netflix, which I thought was a really interesting watch. So now that we talked about kind of operational security, the data that's being collected on you, why you should be more conscientious of your operational security things, let's talk about things you can do to improve your OPSEC. So these are really simple things right off the bat to improve how you're protecting yourself online. And one of the first things you can do is use a VPN. So if you're not familiar with a VPN, I'm just going to walk you through quickly how it works. Normally, when you use the internet, your device goes through your ISP directly to the internet and back. And that web page sees your IP address. The ISP sees exactly where you're going. Logs are kept there. And I don't know, you're kind of in control of what gets kept on your computer to the most part. But if you're using a VPN, what happens is the VPN client on your computer encrypts your communications, goes to the ISP. The ISP doesn't see anything about it except for that data is now being sent to the VPN server. And then the VPN server then takes that data, decrypts it with however the client and the server talk to each other, and then gets that data for you that you requested, comes back to the VPN server, and then gets re-encrypted, gets sent back through the ISP, and then gets opened back up on your computer. So basically what happens is the ISP doesn't see anything except for all your traffic is going through a VPN client. They can't see anything else. And then the internet only sees that your data is coming from a VPN server. And that's really all they can see. Now there's such thing as like VPN leakage and stuff like that if your VPN's not configured correctly. And we won't really talk about that today, but that's an important subject to think about. And also I have this link here. This link goes to, let me just click this, because this link goes to a VPN chart that I'm going to share with you guys. This is a great website that I use just to like verify, like, okay, what's the details for this VPN I'm considering? Like, let's say Proton VPN. Okay, it's got exclusive deals on average. Wait, what is this one again? I think it's Five Eyes country. So anyway, so you get the point, right? So it's the jurisdiction. So like, what kind of agreements does it make with different cybersecurity agencies that are out there? Does it keep your logs? Like, no, yes, that kind of thing. Is it fast? Is it slow? What kind of protocols does it use? Does it have encryption? Does it have? I was just talking about VPN protection, right? Does it have leak protection? I was just talking about VPN leaks, availability, that kind of thing. So it shows over here on a scale of 1 to 5, that type of stuff. But this thing is pretty big. Like, there's a whole lot of details here about it. So take your time, go through this, and if you use a VPN, see how it ranks on this thing. This is a form that's, or a table that's kept up by I think it's this, it's on Reddit. It's like the VPN subreddit or something, but I think it's a pretty thorough VPN chart. So another thing I'd say is use AdBlock. Like, if you're not using AdBlock, download like uBlock Origin or whatever on your browser, because ads they can get kind of dank, like with what they can do, and ads are also super annoying. So just use AdBlock. Also, some malware can hit you through ads, so it's honestly just a safer way to browse using AdBlock. I didn't really do that justice. There's more details there, but another thing I'd say is, like, if you're only using one email across like all these different services and stuff, that's a single point of failure. If an attacker gets that email and it gets compromised, they have all your services. So use many emails. Another thing too, you might be like, oh, I don't want to use multiple emails. Well, use a password manager, because then you can keep track of all those emails and all those passwords you have for all those services, all in a password manager. Preferably use a password manager that hasn't been breached within the last 5 years. Now, a lot of people have been using LastPass, and I used to use LastPass, but since I got breached twice in 1 year, I've switched. So definitely look into your password manager, that type of thing. Always use 2FA, MFA. Those are safe ways to stay secure. Use different usernames across platforms. Like, don't use the same one across each thing. I guess if you're like a Twitch streamer or something and you're building like a name for yourself and that kind of thing, sure, that's fine, because that's not really within the scope of your OPSEC, right? Another thing, that I think is important is turn off your browsing history, clear your cache often, that kind of stuff, because some malware, if it hops onto your computer, will just steal directly out of your cache, and information can be stored there that can be used to compromise your accounts. Like browser sessions, browser, cookies and that type of stuff can be directly stolen out of your browser and used to hijack your current session, like your banking session and that kind of stuff. I would recommend not to use, like I kind of mentioned this earlier, like things like Chrome and Safari or Edge, because they'll just always take your data no matter what. So try and use a more strict browser that allows you more control over your data. Also, make sure you're always using HTTPS. And then I grabbed another slide here just because it didn't really feel like that covered. Obviously, it's not a comprehensive, OPSEC recommendation list, but this one's more behavioral. So it's when you're online and you're talking to people and you're in these communities and stuff like that. Like, what are you saying to them, right? Like, do you really know who's on the other end? That's why I have that picture there. It's kind of goofy, but do you really know who you're talking to, right? Like, what do you know about them? Probably nothing. So can you really trust them, right? What information are you giving to people? Even if you do trust the people you're talking to, is there someone listening in, right? You never know if their computer's been compromised or if your computer's been compromised. I mean, if that's the case, then you're probably already in the hole with that. But if they're compromised and you're talking to this person, they might not have malicious intentions, but what if your data's, someone's eavesdropping and you're the next target because of what you've been saying, right? So also, like, what internet are you using? If it's your ISP, like, do you want your ISP to have all the information about you? So that's probably a good time to start using a VPN if you don't want them to have all these records of you and that kind of stuff. Another thing is, are you using public Wi-Fi? If so, definitely use a VPN, because public Wi-Fi, there's so much man-in-the-middle attack potential for public Wi-Fi. So be very careful. When you're downloading files and that kind of stuff to your computer, are you verifying the hashes? See, this gets a little more advanced, but like, if you're not checking to see if that file matches the integrity of the original file, then it may have been tampered with and you may be compromising yourself, right? Also, always be suspicious of links and emails. Even if you remotely don't trust a link, just copy and paste it into VirusTotal, because VirusTotal will scan the link for you. There's a couple other really good websites like Joe Sandbox, and I think run.any is another one where you can drop samples into it and it'll check if it's malicious and it'll run it in a sandbox to see if any kind of malicious behaviors come out of it. So those are a couple other things. Okay, so in conclusion, if this wasn't very convincing for you, I would plead with you to improve your OPSEC by using a VPN, ad block, and a password manager with 2FA, like two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. Enable those everywhere. Be aware of who and what is collecting your data, and look into the privacy policies as to why. There's websites online that will clarify privacy policies for you, so you don't have to read like the 120-page privacy policy. There's actual websites that will break it down into digestible bullets for you, so you can. And if you don't trust that, then read the privacy policy. And then be generally aware of, like, everywhere you go, you're being tracked, you're being traced, right? People are collecting your data. Try and be more in control of it. And I think that generally wraps up my thoughts for this presentation. So I'm gonna end the recording now.